It's the Post Pod Show.
Hey, Lou, question for you. You ever have a
Yeah.
guest come on, has no idea what they're there for?
Not only did they have no idea what they were there for, they thought that I was actually somebody else and literally didn't understand that we were there to promote. And they kept calling me Larry.
No.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, how are you? Now, here was the fun part. In this particular setup, we were in a Zoom room. And you know how in Zoom it says your name on like the bottom left? Like I think yours.
All you gotta do is
yours
hover.
says Jeff Gibbard, superhero, he, him, or his. Mine says Lou Diamond, whatever it might be, right? To this minute, I can't get over the fact that this person didn't. He kept calling me Larry, and I go, "Do you know what we're here for?" He goes, "Well, I thought you were trying to sell me something." I'm like, "Well, not really.
I'm
This
trying to
is
sell
your
you
appearance on my podcast show."
All right, that's brutal, man.
Yes.
I actually have, when I do my podcast, I have, for each podcast I do, I have a cover image, a whole thing, so it actually has my name directly on the screen. So even if you don't hover over your Zoom or have the thing turn on, you cannot miss it. Though I did have someone recently call me Josh. I was on their show. They called me Josh, and I was like, that's awkward.
I've had people come on to the show with the interview and access via the phone in a weird location.
Yeah.
With like earbuds or the things that plug in your ear. I had one of my favorite one was a woman who knew that it was a podcast interview, but recognized when all of a sudden we had the cameras on and the lights were on and we're setting up and you could see that we're about to record the video. She goes, "Oh, is there going to be video on this particular episode?" Her hair was in the rollers that you would have to curl your hair. Like she had just woken up. And now she was on the left coast out in California. I was based in New York. And so we had
early
the
morning
3-hour
episode, cut her some slack. It's fine.
I think it was like a 8:30 her time type of thing.
That's still early for me.
Yeah, no, early for her. And she was, she did not. She did a very kind. Can we push this off until these rollers got him here? And we did. But yes, that was not prepared for what the content would be. She was ready to do the podcast.
Yeah. It's good. I think not being ready for like video. I'm gonna give people a pass on.
We can give a pass
because sometimes you miss that in the email. But showing up and being like, "Hi, I'm here to promote my book," and you're like, "Great, tell us about your book," and you're like, "Ooh, hold on, let me just get my book out." I've noticed this a lot. So I have a cheat sheet that I just keep on my screen, but that's just in case I have like a massive brain failure in the midst of an episode. But like, I'm not like reading off of it during episodes. I have actually had people where, like, if those of you watching video can see this, where I'll ask a question and they'll be like, the thing is that the lovable leader is about building great teams with trust, respect, and kindness. And you're like, bro, you wrote the book. You should probably know what it's about. And I'm asking you questions out of genuine curiosity, and you should probably know your material.
I have this expression that I actually spoke at an event to professional speakers who obviously are authors or promoting their brands. And that was the audience of people. And the message I had was actually about how you can make money as a guest as in a podcast show. And it was a lot of the using the podcast as a platform to promote your brand, to market your book, to sell your offerings. But the number one lesson, which has to do with promoting yourself and being the best version, is because so many people listen to podcasts, hire speakers, hire consultants, hire coaches, because that's who's listening to that environment. They're looking for those resources. I state this all the time, that you need to be spectacular when you're a guest on a show and bring the best version of yourself, because when you go on a podcast show like your show or my show or any others, we've got thousands of people listening to these things. When you go speak on stage at that particular event, there's very few of those instances where it's tens of thousands. Mostly it's hundreds or dozens in the groups that most of these people are speaking on. And I'm always like, don't you want the best version of yourself to be what that recording is? And a lot of time people bring a very low energy into the podcast, and that preparedness, like to be prepared and ready to market their book, to market their services, to tell people their story, because why are they going on the show for the first place? And this is the lesson.
Yeah.
They're coming on the show to promote themselves.
This is about a wise person once wrote that you need to show up. A wise person once wrote that. And no, I agree with you. And it's interesting because, we talk about preparation of understanding your content. Great book.
Shameless plug.
You talk about knowing your content, which I think is an important part of preparation. Obviously, you got to know your shtick. You got to know some of your talking points. You got to be able to go off book and improvise, et cetera. But I think the point you're making is also being able to show up with your energy. Yeah. What's interesting though, is I think you and I are both pretty engaging, high energy hosts, right? Like when we bring a person on, we're like, tell me about you. I want to know about your deepest, darkest secrets. Get on the therapy couch, right? Like we're in it. I've been on shows as a guest where I show up and I'm like, hey, what's up? How's it going? I'm Jeff. I do all sorts of cool stuff. And the host is like, great. Well, question 3. I'd like to know, in your book, you talk about
on page 24
and page 6. And it's like, then it's tough for you to stay at that level because now there's just too much contrast, right? Like you got to be within a standard deviation of one another.
I'll tell you an embarrassing moment for myself where I was a guest and not necessarily unprepared.
I got to get a drum roll sound.
This is a good one. This was a TV spot. This wasn't even a podcast stuff. This was a TV spot for a local network in a local station in Nashville, in Tennessee. And they were going through at the back of my book, all of the different ingredients that we have for the different speakeasy conversational flights.
Yeah.
And there's some really punny and funny things that are put in there. And a couple of them I know offhand. And on that particular one, I literally hesitated and quickly thought about it, but you could see that I needed exactly what you just said, that quick cheat sheet of things you needed to have right near me. That's the only time I ever think I was unprepared for something because, oh my God, they're really getting detailed.
Unprepared. That's detail. Like that. That's on page detailed. 7. You use the word okay, I don't have the book memorized, but I know what it's about. And I know my general frameworks and concepts.
But you could actually see me have a panic moment
Yeah. No, I feel that. That makes perfect sense. Well, I think that the moral is that if you're going to go on a show, we as the hosts, at least most of us, do a little preparation at least. Maybe we read your book. Maybe we, stalked you on the internets a little bit and we learned a little bit about you. We have some questions. We want to be ready to talk to you and ask you some questions. You need to know who you are. You need to be able to at least show up and answer the questions about who you are, what you're about, what's your book about, what are you promoting, what's your deal? Anything else to add to that, Lou?
I would say you need to know the show that you're going to go on and at least listen to one episode because most of these shows have a routine or there's something fun about it. Or there's a speed round question or there's one particular piece that at the beginning of the episode that the guest is going to do just so you have a little familiarity. I understand we're busy and you may not get to it, but at least get 2 seconds of it. And here's my favorite part. If you know it's on your calendar and you're about to jump on to the recording, it probably could take you 4 seconds for you to just go in and what do they do on that show? Okay, this is what I need to do. Great. I got it. I'm ready.
Yeah, it doesn't take much. So I believe the folks over at Interview Valley, right?
Yeah.
So I've been both a client of theirs and they send me a ton of guests and they're amazing. And one of the things I remember from a webinar that they did was talking about how frustrating it is for podcasters. And I agree with this. I'm curious if you do too. But when you have a guest come on and there's a thing that you do it every show, right? So I ask at the beginning of every episode, what's the dent you wish to make in the universe? Because I want to know, what are you about, man? And I've had a lot of people go, wow, that's a good question. And I'm like, I literally ask it every episode. I know it's a good question. That's why it's in every episode. So in the Interview Valet, they talked about you don't want to say that's a good question to every good question because some of those good questions are part of the format of the show and you should be familiar with it. So be ready for it. And don't say, I've never thought of that before. If it's the thing that always gets asked, you should be ready for it.
So my advice to the guests coming on the program, just do a little preparation or something just to know a little bit of familiarity. My advice to podcast hosts who are dealing with this, give the guest a little bit of ignorance help, if you would. Pretend that they don't know anything about it and say, I'm just going to give you a run through of what's going to happen here. Because I think if they do that, you're going to get them comfortable anyway, and then you can just roll right in it. And don't be annoyed by it because we're all busy and we're not really
100%. And I always say to my guests, I even put it in the email I sent them right before it. I say, my job is to make you look good. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad on my show. That's not good for me. It's not good for you. So what I'll often do
always look good, Jeff. Come on.
Thank you. Most handsome podcast host in the business. Hey, what I'll do is as part of my preparation, I'll at least know enough that if they seem to be struggling with their own content, I'll be like, I'll kind of feed them what I really liked is when you talked about this, this, and this. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. You know, like I'll kind of spoon feed them into it. So anyway, I think it's very important that people need to study their playbook. They need to know their shticks. They need to know what they're there for. And that, I think, is what we could wrap up the Post Pod Show for this episode with. You have been Larry Diamond, and I've been Jeff Gibbard. And this has been...
It's the Post Pod Show.